Hello friends. This is your friend back with a new fanfic. What if Naruto met his mother and discovered a new summon power in the Forest of Death? Episode 1. If you like this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and leave your thoughts in the comments. Now, during the dangerous Chūnin Exams, Naruto's journey takes an unexpected turn in the Forest of Death. A mysterious encounter with his mother's chakra changes his destiny forever and awakens a summoning contract unlike anything the Shinobi world has ever seen. Now, let's start. Deep inside a dark forest holding back a gigantic brown snake was Naruto Uzumaki, and he was standing in front of his teammate Sasuke Uchiha. On the top of the snake was a man with long smooth black hair and black eyes, and he was dressed in plain gray garbs with a black polo and pants underneath, a thick purple rope belt tied in a large knot behind his back, blue tomo-shaped earrings, and shinobi sandals with bandages around his calves. So he's still alive, but, the man thought before his tough shot out of his mouth and around Naruto. Now this will not do, the man said around his tongue as he formed a hand seal. Now then, let's look at you, he said as his tongue moved Naruto's jacket with his tongue, along with a tattoo that was on it. What the when did Naruto get that? Naruto's female Sakura teammate asked herself in thought as she looked at the tattoo. The man looked at the tattoo. Now, this is fascinating when this seal sends a minuscule amount of the Kyuubi's chakra into you, and when you feel range, that amount of chakra increases, and you become nothing more than a mindless beast, he said as he moved his hand behind his back as purple chakra formed with 5 symbols. Sakura watched as the man moved his hand over Naruto's tattoo before he rammed his hand into Naruto's chest. Gogyo Fuin, the man called out. The blonde's eyes shot wide before they locked onto Sakura, who saw that something had happened to Naruto's eyes. They gained crosshairs, and Sakura felt something on her hand, but the man threw Naruto over his shoulder before she could look. Sakura quickly pulled out a kunai and threw it at Naruto, hoping it would pin him to a tree, but the man saw kunai fly and throw one of his own. Both kunai hit just before Sakura's could pin Naruto to a tree, and Sakura could do was watch as Naruto fell into the darkness of the forest below. Naruto, she called out, don't worry. We'll find yo. She was calling to Naruto, but he became dead to the world as he fell. Naruto's body fell though a great distance before his body rag-dolled over branches as they broke, and it was not just the branches that broke. As Naruto landed, most of his body was broken, with his arms and legs broken with blood seeping out of his hands and legs along with his mouth. After a few hours of lying on the ground, a tiger walked up to Naruto, thinking he was an easy snack but was blindsided by 3 bears that seemed to guard the young ninja. But that was not all that was guarding him. Wolves and foxes joined the bears in fighting the tiger, and knowing that it would not win, it ran as the bears started to huddle around Naruto along with the wolves and a fox. But they did not know that they were being watched by something. It was a small and slim reptile with a wolf-like body shape, light green scales with blue and reddish stripes covering its body, and a blue-colored underbelly. It kept out of the forest as the animals looked ready to fight it, but it shook its head. I'm not here to fight, it said, showing that it had a male as it walked over to Naruto before taking a sniff of him. Could he be the one we need? He asked himself in thought before he turned to the animals. I can take him to a place that can heal him if you let me, he told them as the animals looked at each other before one bear carefully lifted Naruto onto the back of another as all the animals that were there turned to the reptile. You all want to come with me? He asked them as they nodded. He sighed before nodding. Fine now, then form a circle around me, he told them as they all did as asked, and then the next thing that they knew was that a large technique formula formed beneath them and then they were replaced with a large puff of smoke. Summoning Realm, Shinki Sakai. The reptile, along with the animals and the knocked out Naruto, was transported to a massive forest which also consists of clearings close to the coast and a combination of cliffs and giant trees that create a vast vertical space. Around their feet was thick and lush with greenery high in the cliffs and branches of massive trees, with a large lace with rivers branching out of it. The reptile led the troop of animals in the forest as other reptile-like animals looked at them, leading them to a colossal mountain in the middle of the woods. The small troop followed before they came before a great beast. It was a reptilian as well, but it was more significant than the one that led them in, and it looked to be the same size as a biju, if not bigger than them. It had 6 large, muscular legs, and its body was primarily covered in lime green scales with yellow scales around its long neck. Its face was covered in a very light shade of red scales with the same color scales covering its tail with a spiked club. Spikes ran down its head to the tail club with spikes running up its legs. It was a mighty dragon. A Jagras, what is your name, little one? The dragon said with a deep male as its white eye looked down at the Jagras. I'm Shosun, the scout you sent out. Ascorath-sama. The now named Shosun called out, and even though I have brought animals here, the human that is with them, I believe that he could be our summoner, Shosun said as Ascorath turned his gaze to the knocked-out Naruto. A Jinchuriki and a demigod, Ascorath muttered as he moved his head closer to Naruto, but before he can be tested, he needs healing. Call Grandini so that she may heal this boy, Ascorath said to a small dragon next to him who nodded and flew off. As they waited, Ascorath watched the animals guard Naruto, and he could tell that they knew they could defeat them, but they would go down fighting. And after, a small white another dragon joined them. It was a large, 4-legged dragon whose appearance differed considerably from Ascorath's. Its white body appears covered in tissue similar to bird feathers rather than scales, and its feet also resemble bird talons. The head of this dragon looked covered in what appeared to be fur, and the skull was somewhat broad and flat, with the fur extending down the neck into the upper chest region. You summoned me, Ascorath-sama, the dragon asked with a gentle female voice. Yes, Grandini healed this human so that I must speak with him, Ascorath said as the now named Grandini nodded, moved closer to Naruto, and held out her claws, showing that her front claws were also her wings. Hiru, Grandini called out as her claw let out a sky blue glow, and Naruto also gained a sky blue glow as his broken bones started to heal and the blood leaking out started to be drawn back into him. After a couple of minutes, Grandini put her claw down, but Naruto still did not wake up. But Ascorath nodded to her. Thank you, I'll take it from here, he said as he moved one of his claws over to Naruto and moved his jacket out of the way. So I was right, his chakra is being stopped and disturbed by another seal, he thought as looked at the seal before moving his claw away and looked to the bear who was carrying Naruto. Can you set him down and get his jacket off so that I can remove the seal that is disturbing him? Ascorath asked the bear, who nodded and slowly, with the help of the other animals, set Naruto on the ground in front of the dragon with the wolf and the fox working together. They got his jacket off. Thank you. Now then, he said before he moved his claw back over Naruto and placed it gently on the Uzumaki's seal. Ryu Fuinpo. Fuhakai, Ascorath called out. The top of his claw gave off a dark green flow as the seal that was recently added to Naruto is starting to glow the same green before it began to vanish, and when he moved his claw away the seal that was added was gone. Ascorath turned to Shosun. Return to your brood while we wait for him to awaken, he told the Jagras, who bowed his head and then walked over to the cave, and Grandini also left, leaving Ascorath, Naruto and the small troop of animals in the cave. When Ascorath turned back to Naruto, he saw his head resting on a woman's lap. She was a fair-skinned and slender woman of feminine build with silver-violet eyes and long crimson hair that was tied back into a ponytail. She wore a white shirt with an open silver jacket, black form-fitting pants that reached her calf, and black boots. Asgoroth narrowed his eyes at her, and as he was about to speak, she beat him to the punch. "Thank you for helping my son," she told the dragon, but she did not look at him. Asgoroth lay down as his head moved to that it was level with both the woman. "What is your name, goddess?" he asked her as he studied her. And the animals that were around her as well. The 3 bears were sleeping around her, with the wolves curled at her side, and the fox curled on Naruto's chest. "I am Artemis," she said as she looked up at the dragon. "And do you think that he will be a good summer for the dragons?" Artemis asked him. "I do not know, and only if he passes the tests of mind, body and soul," Asgoroth said before he looked down at Naruto. "But for some strange reason, I believe that he is going to pass each test with flying colors," he told Artemis, who nodded. Both of them talked some more as Artemis set Naruto to rest next to one of the bears, and after about an hour, Naruto started to wake up, and he looked around, seeing the strange area that was around him. Where the hell am I?" he asked as Asgoroth looked down at Naruto, who looked shocked at the giant dragon in front of him. "Are you with that snake freak?" Naruto asked him, shaking slightly. "Snake freak?" Asgoroth asked as he looked at Naruto. "I do not know who you speak of, but I know of the snake summoning clan, if that helps," he told Naruto, who looked confused for a second before nodding. "Oh, I get it. Like my sensei's dogs," Naruto said before looking around. "Where am I?" Naruto asked as he looked. "You are on Shinkisakai, the home of the dragon summoning clan," Asgoroth said as Naruto turned back to him. "One of the many dragons under me found you and brought you here to heal and to see if you were the person that we have been waiting for to sign our summoning scroll," the giant dragon told Naruto, who nodded before his eyes shot wide, but Artemis cut him off before he could speak. "This realm and yours have different time zones, with this realm moving faster than yours," she told him as Naruto turned to her, his eyes shooting wide. "You're the woman in my dreams," Naruto muttered as she smiled. "She is your mother, young demigod," Asgoroth said as Naruto headshotted him. "My mother, demigod?" Naruto asked as he looked between the two of them. "Demigod means a child born from a mortal and a god. In your case, your father and I," Artemis said as she walked over. "And you look so much like your father," she said as she looked at his face. "Then why could you not?" Naruto started but stopped when he saw her sad face. "Raise you," she finished for him as he nodded. "It all started around 2,000 years ago with my half-brother Hermes, who fell in love with a mortal woman and had a daughter with her," she told her son, who nodded along as Asgoroth listened in. "He was so in love with her that he forgot his duties as a god, but Hermes did not care. Not long after that, he soon wished it, as Hermes soon watched the woman he loved and daughter grow old and die before his very eyes," she said as she looked at Naruto, and he could see that behind her youthful looks her eyes looked old. He shut down and was close to fading from the words, so the leaders of the different pantheons came together and decreed that no god or goddess shall raise their child, Artemis told him as Naruto nodded. "If you do not mind me asking, I have heard the name Artemis before, and they say that you're a virgin goddess," Asgoroth said as Artemis nodded. "You're right, I am, and technically, I still am, but it's slightly weird," Artemis said as Naruto cracked his head to the side. He had still not released the animals around him. "What do you mean?" Naruto asked her. "Well, my immortal father, who I do not see as my father, was being an absolute, so his wife, my stepmother, came up with a plan as she was tired of the tyranny of Zeus, so she went to me, and my twin brother," Artemis said as both dragon and demigod nodded. "Both of us agreed, with my reason, because one of my half-brothers and Apollo, well, he wanted to stop being blamed for every time a prophecy comes around, and he gets blamed if it's not what he wants," Artemis said as Naruto shook his head at that. "Then we split up to gather more help. So I went to my uncle Poseidon, who agreed to do it as Zeus was being unreasonable. Hera went to my favorite half-brother Hephaestus, who made robes that would bind him to his chair. And my twin gave the word to our half-sister Athena. Artemis said as Naruto nodded. And it almost worked as was getting him to promise to rule fairly, but then a being known as a 100-hander and ruined it. And so he punished most of us, Artemis said as Naruto looked shocked. Punished for wanting him to rule as fair? Naruto asked, but Asgoroth sighed. It happens, young fox, as with the best intentions can lead to good, but if the one that sees it does not like it, he can do as he wishes, and if that someone is a ruler, Asgoroth said with a shake of his giant head. While Athena and I were not punished, I was being watched closer than normal, but then 39 years ago, one of my hunters did something terrible, Artemis said as both Naruto and Asgoroth listened carefully. She, while hunting down a monster, slaughtered a small group of men that was neither in her way or helping the beast, and the fates along with Zeus was furious with both her and myself. And I was not that happy with her as well, Artemis told them as Naruto's jaw dropped open. Why would she do that? Naruto asked as Asgoroth nodded. I asked her the same question before the Fates and Zeus, and her response was that she was ridding the world of filthy pigs without any sign of guilt, as I knew that I did not help with how I am. Artemis said as Naruto looked questionably at his mother. I hated men as when I grew up in a place where men would happily take advantage of women, and that sadly has not changed, as so I have a strong dislike for men, but that has lighted slightly, Artemis explained. Oh, Naruto said, stroking the fox on his stash. Anyway, I banished her from my hunt and turned her into a pig herself, and then I gave her a head start before releasing my wolves on her. But that did not stop my punishment, Artemis said as both males nodded. The Fates told me that they have given out a prophecy and that I had a part to play in it, and all I needed to do was have a child, Artemis said as Naruto looked at his mother. Me right? Naruto asked her as Artemis nodded. Yes. Anyway, when I was told this, I was beyond pleased and did not like it. But I went to Mount Olympus and had my soul moved to a mortal body, Artemis said as a smile started to crawl onto her face. Before I was fully put in the mortal body, I was told the prophecy. And it goes, a mischievous blue-eyed boy who can name all the tailed beasts and frolic amongst them and change the world, she said as Artemis smiled at Naruto. Before he could speak, she continued. I was then born to the head of the Uzumaki clan, Daisuke and Hikari Uzumaki, and was named Kushina. But I still kept the goddess part of myself as I grew up. And one day, Daisuke asked me to follow him before we overlooked the sea and asked one question, Artemis said as Asgoroth raised a brow. And what question was that? He asked her. Tell me, Kushina, what do you see? I told him the sea, but he shook his head before he pointed into the sea. I looked closer and saw a whirlpool. So I told him, Artemis said with a fond smile on her face. He nodded and told me that the land of whirlpools has been the home of the Uzumaki clan for a long time, but I already knew that. He then turned to me and said the whirlpool is also represented the Uzumaki in our lives, and then he asked he my name when I said Kushina. He asked me my real name, so I told him. And we talked. And then I slowly started to let my walls down around him before I one day call him dad instead of sir or father, Artemis said as Noro smiled. Her smile soon vanished. Soon now, the second great ninja war happened, and our home was being targeted by Kiri, Kumo and Aiwa, so my siblings and I had to split up, with my brother going to America and my sister going to Kusa, while I went to Konoha and was made when you are. Artemis said as Naruto looked shocked. But it was a duty that I trained for with my father and me. After Mito-sama transferred the Kyuubi, I then went to the Ninja Academy where I met your father, Artemis said as her smile returned, this time a loving smile as Naruto's smile also returned. A namikaze if I'm right, judging by the little fox's smell, Asgoroth said as Naruto's eyes shot wide. You mean? Naruto asked as Artemis nodded. Yes, your father was Minato Namikaze, but when I met him, I thought that he didn't have the physical attributes and was far too polite and nice as well as too quiet, and when he said that he wanted to become Hokage, I scoffed, but after a few days of living in the village, Kumo tried to kidnap me and take me to their village, Artemis told her son, who looked angry. So they tried that back then as well, Naruto said as Artemis looked confused as well as Asgoroth. 10 years ago, Kuma tried to kidnap a Hyuga for them, but that failed, Naruto growled as his eyes turned red as Artemis nodded. That is how the Raikage is and how Kumo has always been the most power-hungry nation, Artemis told her son, who nodded. Anyway, before I tell you the rest, I have to explain something. You see, I used to hate my hair color. It was bad for hunting as it stuck out like sore thumb, Artemis explained as Naruto looked shocked. Why is that? It looks better in blonde, Naruto said as Artemis looked at him with a smile. And I think that I would have loved to have your hair. I mean, it's a beautiful color, Naruto told her as Artemis smiled at him. Really? She asked him as Naruto nodded. Well, anyway, on my way to Kumo, I started to pull strands of hair out, hoping that someone would find me, and someone did, Artemis said as Naruto gained a smile. Dad? Naruto asked her. Artemis nodded. He came thou the forest quickly barreling thou the grown Kumo nin before he picked me up and started to carry me back to Konoha, and when I asked him how he could have found me, Minato said that he saw my beautiful red hair on the floor and had to save me as he did not want to wake up the next day and not see me, and from that day I started to love my red hair as it was our red thread of fate, Artemis said as both boy and dragon smiled at the sweet moment. Anyway, years passed and I became a kunoichi of Konoha and placed on a team under Tsunade Senju, and on my team was Mebuki Haruno and Sum Inazuka, while on your father's team, he had Makoto Uchiha and Tuki Ichiraku, who was taught by Jiraiya. Who was your father's father? Artemis said, but sat the name Jiraiya. I have heard about this Jiraiya. He is the summoner of the toads, if I am not mistaken, Asgoroth said as he gained a thoughtful look. That's right. You see, out of your 3 grandfathers, 2 are men driven by lust, and only one of them actually cares for their family, Artemis said with a wave of her hand. Anyway, your father and I started to date when we became genin, and when we became Chūnin I met your father's mother and found out that he was like you, Artemis said as Asgoroth's eyes shot wide along with Naruto's. He had a demigod father as well as a goddess for a mother, Asgoroth said as Artemis nodded. Naruto looked at his mother in shock. Who was his mom? Naruto asked her. My name, my little cub, is Amaterasu, a woman's voice said as the 3 turned to see a woman walking over to them. They saw a pale-skinned woman with delicate facial features who had long, sweeping black hair, the same blue eyes as Naruto, and thin eyebrows, and she wore a red shade of lipstick on her lips. She wore a high-collared white hime kimono with 2 large red circles on the leaves with a necklace of green jade tomo, and over her feet looked to be white tabi and royal sandals. Samurai armor seemed to cover her arms and shoulders, and at her waist was a round mirror. Artemis turned to her and smiled. Hello, Amaterasu, how are you? Artemis asked her as the other goddess walked over. Naruto got up off the bear and walked over to his grandmother. So, he started, now knowing what to say as Amaterasu smiled. You wish to know about me? She asked Naruto, who nodded. Very well, I'm from the same world as your mother, and my domains are the rising sun, the royal family of the country that I belong to and of creation, Amaterasu explained to Naruto. Artemis smiled at her mother-in-law before turning back to Naruto. After I met your grandmother, I told Minato who I really was, and he did not care, so I was happy, and we spent many years together, Artemis said before his eyes became sad and the smile vanished. Then that night 13 years ago when the Kyuubi was released from the seal, Artemis said as Naruto looked at his mother. What happened? Naruto asked her. The night I went into labor. Minato was there making sure that the seal did not break as I was giving birth to you, and it did not break, and you were born without a problem, Artemis said before the air around everyone chilled. but then someone came and killed both my attendants and my midwife and held you hostage. And he ordered Minato to step away from me, or he would kill you, Artemis said as Naruto's eyes shot wide. Minato sprung into action and saved you, but as I was too weak to fight back at the time, he captured me and released the Kyuubi before they had it rampage through the village, and Minato and his toad by the name of Gamabunta fought the fox and released it on the menhold. Artemis said as Amaterasu looked sad as she knew where this was going. I used an Uzumaki technique called Kongo Fusa to make a barrier, and I originally planned to seal it back into myself. It would kill my mortal body, but it would give Konoha 5 to 6 years to prep while it reforms. But your father told me that he was going to seal it in himself, but then the Kyuubi broke the chains that were holding it back, Artemis explained to Naruto and Asgoroth, who nodded. And Minato was weakened from his fight with the man that released the Kyuubi from Artemis, so he could only do the best option at the time, Amaterasu said as Naruto looked at her. And seal the Kyuubi in me, Naruto said as both goddesses nodded. Minato used an Uzumaki Fuinjutsu called Shikifujin, and it summons the Shinigami to seal anything so long. And so we prepared to use another Uzumaki Fuinjutsu by the name of Hake no Fuin Shiki that would let you use a small part of the Kyuubi's chakra. But then the fox went to kill you, so both Minato and I jumped in the way of the claw, Artemis said as Naruto looked shocked. Minato started to adjust the seal while I sent my last mortal words to you before he finished the seal and sealed the Kyuubi in you, and we both died not soon after that, with me returning to my godly body more in tune with myself than ever before, and my hunters is happy to see me return, Artemis told them. But something happened, didn't it? Asgoroth said, reminding everyone that he was there. Yes, I went to Olympus to see my daughter-in-law. And I found her bawling her eyes out at the loss of her husband and the fact that she could not see her son. And I joined in grieving. And as I hardly ever have a demigod child, my grief was much stronger, and weeks passed as we grieved over Minato and that we could not be with you. But Artemis knew that if she did not do something, Zeus would find you and his paranoia would lead to your death, Amaterasu told him as Naruto turned to his mother. Artemis nodded. I rejoined my hunt. And over the years, I have been gathering favors from over gods so that one day I could help you. And some of the gods that knew of you said they would help none less, Artemis said as Naruto nodded. Is that why you are here? Naruto asked her. She nodded. Yes, I called in one of my favors when I felt that you were close to death, Artemis said before she smiled. And I have decided that I'm now going to call them in so that I can train you up to be a Chūnin, Artemis told him, but Naruto looked shocked. I need the training to be a good genin first, Naruto said as both his goddesses and the dragon looked confused. Surely, you have had training by your sensei, Asgoroth asked him, but Naruto scoffed. All Kakashi sensei teaches me, and my teammate Sakura does teamwork drills while he takes my other teammate and trains him in Kaden ninjutsu, Naruto said as Artemis looked shocked. Kakashi, you said, she asked her son, and when Naruto nodded, oh, Kakashi, what are you doing, she muttered. She then gained a thoughtful look on her face. What about Hana Inuzuka, Kurenai Yuhi or Yugao Izuki? Have any of them taught you anything? She asked her son, who shook his head. The only people that you and Dad knew that helped me are Old Man Ichiraku and Gigi, Naruto told his mother, who looked shocked. Asgoroth let out a growl that shook the ground, and humans wonder why Jinchuriki grow to hate their village, he growled out as Amaterasu looked angry beyond belief. Artemis then shook her head. All right, then tell me what you know so that I can help you, Artemis said as Amaterasu shook her head along with Asgoroth. What can we do to help him? She said as she indicated to herself and the giant dragon. Artemis looked at the two of them in shock, along with Naruto, but he needs to go through the summoning test, she asked Asgoroth, who shook his giant head. The test can be done at any moment, and I can allow the young foxes training here, he told her. And it is given for a grandparent to spoil their grandchild, Amaterasu said as Artemis looked over to her before a small smile formed. Thank you, she said as all three turned to Naruto. Well, to start off with leaf concentration practice, how to throw a kunai. I was always second with that only because I was given weighted kunai, the Nawanuke no Jutsu. I can throw shuriken, be it Fuma shuriken or normal shuriken. And I was third but again was given weighted shuriken. Naruto said as a twitch formed on Artemis' left eye. Let me see the Kakurimi no Jutsu. Then I kind of mastered the Funyu no Jutsu and Kaifu no Jutsu. Naruto listed off as two more dragons entered the cave that they were in. They both were massive but were smaller than Asgoroth. The first dragon had platinum scales that glowed with a faint blue sheen and blue eyes. The second 5 heads, 1 black, 1 blue, 1 green, 1 red and 1 white and a long tail tipped with a venomous stinger, and its body was covered in dark red scales. I know how to use Kaifujutsu, Shuriken and Cage Shuriken no Jutsu as well. I make my own explosive tag and smoke bombs, Naruto said as they nodded. Senbon, I struggle along with the Bunshin no Jutsu as I just can't do that jutsu as the clones look dead. Kawarimi no Jutsu I'm sort of okay with and I'm excellent with the Henge no Jutsu, and I've made my own jutsu that I call Waroke no Jutsu where I turn into a woman, Naruto said as Artemis looked shocked. But Naruto was not done. I also know the Kage Bunshin no Jutsu and Taju Kage Bunshin no Jutsu, and I mixed the Kage Bunshin no Jutsu and my Waroke no Jutsu to make something called Haremu no Jutsu, Naruto said before nodding. Oh, then there was the Kinobori no Shugyo. And that's it. And I can use wire strings, he said as the others looked at him. They nodded as Artemis made an internal list, and Amaterasu looked at her grandson. So no genjutsu or taijutsu, she asked him, but Naruto shook his head. What about his demigod powers? Asgoroth asked as Artemis looked at the dragon and then at Naruto. Alright, I want you to say yes or no as my aunt and I had to make a list for just this moment, Artemis told Naruto, who nodded. So moonlight empowerment, like making you stronger, faster, more energy, more durable and faster healing, Artemis said as Naruto closed his eyes. Yes, I felt it for the first time on the night I became a ninja, he told her as she nodded. Night vision, Artemis asked, with Naruto nodding again. A few years ago, when I was younger, he told her. Gender swapping, the moon goddess asked as Naruto nodded. Yes, last week I was having an argument with someone that I'm teaching, and before I knew it, he was changed into a girl, and both he and I were shocked before the next day happened. He turned back to normal, Naruto said before he gained a thoughtful look on his face. And for some reason when I use my Waroke no Jutsu I turn into a girl. Like a true transformation, Naruto said as Artemis smiled at him. Wild shape, the ability to fully change into an animal, Artemis asked as Naruto nodded again. Yay, when I was younger, I turned into a fox for a while, and sometimes I slept like a fox, Naruto said as Amaterasu started to pitch what Naruto looked like as a fox. True hunter, that means that you can hunt anything, she asked Naruto, who narrowed his eyes in thought. Kind of a few weeks ago when I was in the waves, I was tracking something, and it was easy, Naruto said as his mother nodded. Virginity detection, that means you can tell if a woman or girl is a virgin, Artemis explained as she looked shocked. Is that what it was? Naruto said as Asgoroth raised a brow at him. What do you mean? Asgoroth asked the blonde. Well, there is this Anbu who watches over me, and for some reason, I know that she's a virgin, he said as the dragon nodded. Beast speak, meaning you can understand all animals of the world, Artemis said as Naruto sighed. Yes, and that was annoying when I found out when I was doing D-rank missions with walking dogs. And they are all hyperactive, Naruto said as Artemis smiled at him before going over the list again in her head. All right then. There are only 2 abilities left, but those are for when I claim you as my child, Artemis said as Naruto nodded but looked confused. Why can't you claim me now? He asked her. Artemis opened her mouth, but Amaterasu cut her off. You do know when you became Kushina, your soul was put in the body of the stillborn, she said as Artemis looked at her with a raised brow but nodded. Your entire soul, and I mean both halves, she said as Artemis' eyes shot wide before she looked at Naruto. Diana, if you would, Artemis thought before she heard a voice that sounded like hers but had a rougher tone. I thought you would never ask, Diana said as above Naruto's head a silver glow before it started to take shape. It was a crescent moon with an arrow in the middle of it. Now then, let's start with your training, Artemis said as Naruto nodded. But first, the tests, Asgoroth said as Naruto turned to the dragon, but he pointed to the dragon with platinum scales. Tell me, son of Artemis, what would you do with our summoning contract? The dragon asked Naruto, and the voice sounded male. I would protect my village and those that I hold dear, Naruto said as the dragon's blue eyes started to glow before he let out a roar. You have passed the test of the soul, he called out as the dragons with 5 heads were next. Next is my test, and it is the test of the body, the dragon's far left head said in a sleepy voice but sounded female. Are you ready? The center head asked as she moved all her heads over to Naruto. And it shocked the goddesses and the animals when the dragon unleashed 5 breath attacks at him. As they rushed in, the dragon stopped, and they found that Naruto was not affected and looked fine. So she roared, you have passed the test of the body, or otherwise known as the test of will. As those with weak will would have been burnt then frozen, poisoned then shocked before melted by acid, the center head told Naruto as the goddesses sighed in relief. Asgoroth then approached Naruto, who looked up at him. The final test is known as the test of the mind, he told Naruto as he raised a claw up and touched Naruto's head, and both their eyes glowed. Asgoroth glowed white, while Naruto gave off a slight bluish-silver glow before moving his claw out of the way and letting out a roar as well. Naruto Namikaze Uzumaki, son of Artemis the Moon Maiden and descendant of Amaterasu the Rising Sun, you have passed the test of mind, and you may become the summoner of our dragon, he told Naruto as another dragon walked in. This dragon was serpentine with emerald green scales, a yellow underbelly, 4 legs and 2 arms, each having 3 claws. Long silver hair flowed off its head along with a tuft of silver hair on the end of its tail, growing down its back with crimson red hair as well that started at the crown of its hair then down its back and along its tail, and unlike the 3 that was in the cave already, this one was the side of a horse if this dragon walked on all 6 legs. Oh, and on its head were 2 large moose-like antlers, and it was wearing a purple vest and leather tassets with fur lining. Majira, this young man has passed the 3 tests and allow him to sign it, Asgoroth told the now named Majira, who moved something off his back. It was a black and red scroll. Before Majira started to unroll it to show where the name would go was empty. Artemis looked at him. Right, your name is in blood, and then if need be, they will tell you to add something, Artemis said as Naruto nodded, and so he wrote his name after he bit his thumb before looking at Asgoroth. For us dragons, a chakra stamp would do for us, he told Naruto, who looked at his mother. Put some blood on your finger before sending chakra to the blood and then press it on the scroll, Artemis told him. He did as he was told, and when he pulled his finger away, it sewed his symbol. A spiral that flows into a lick of flame. Majira then rolled the scroll up before turning to Asgoroth. Is that all, Asgoroth-sama? Majira asked, showing that they were male, and at Asgoroth's nod, Majira walked out the mouth of the cave. Now, to train you up, Artemis said as she walked out of the cave with Naruto, Amaterasu, and the animals. They all walked over to a large lake that had some dragons drinking from it, as they turned to the approaching group. Now let's start with Suimin Hoko no Gyo, and this is like Ki no Bori no Shugyo. But you will need a thick constant stream of chakra on the bottom of your feet as you walk across the water's surface. Artemis said as she continued walking until she reached the excellent distance away. Now it's a good idea to wear clothing that is good for swimming, so I'll be back in a moment with just what you need, Artemis said as she glowed silver before she teleported away. Underscore. Realm of the gods, under the sea, Atlantis. Underscore. Artemis appeared underwater before her form changed to a great white shark before she started swimming to find the god she was looking for. After an hour of swimming, she was met with a large city on par with her home Mount Olympus, with wide courtyards and columned pavilions. 20 or 30 buildings are made of abalone, white but gleaming with rainbow colors. Fish and octopi dart in and out of the windows. The gardens are full of exotic sea plants and coral colonies, with luminescent jellyfish drifting about like Christmas lights. In this center was the Palace of Atlantis, which was as big as a mansion made of pearl, sea stone, and abalone shells. The paths are lined with glowing pearls, the doorways are enormous, and the roof has a big open deck that has been set up as a command center. A merman guard turned to see Artemis approach in shark form. "I seek an audience with my uncle," she told them as they nodded and let her in. She swam in and found the throne that her uncle sat upon and found that it was made out of coral. The mosaic on the floor showed an exact map of the palace grounds and the surrounding ocean, along with colored stone tiles representing different armies, and sea monsters shifted around as the forces changed position. After lazily swimming around, the god that she was waiting for turned up. He has black hair, a neatly trimmed black beard, a deep tan, and sea green eyes surrounded by sun crinkles, and his hands are also scarred like an old-time fisherman's. He was dressed in leather sandals, khaki Bermuda shorts, a bright Hawaiian shirt, and a cap decorated with fishing lures which said, "Neptune's lucky fishing hat." He looked at the shark near his throne before he sensed the power that was behind its power. "Artemis, it's good to see you," he said as he made a small air bubble in the water for her. Artemis turned back to her standard form before smiling at her uncle. "Uncle Poseidon, do you have any swimming trucks that I can have for my," she said before Poseidon cut her off. "Your son?" he asked her with a smile as she nodded. "Sure. But can I meet him?" Poseidon asked her. The moon goddess raised a brow. "Yes, but can I ask why?" she asked. Poseidon looked at her before he summoned to form a rainbow video showing a young boy that looked like a young Poseidon. "I would like to ask him a favor so that he can teach my son how to use his powers," Poseidon said as Artemis nodded. "I think he will," she said as they both glowed. "Follow me," she said as they both were teleported away. Underscore. Shinki Sakai. Underscore. Artemis and Poseidon appeared, and what they found shocked the sea god and made the moon goddess laugh. It was Naruto with one hand, the fingers cursed, imitating claws while he was going strikes at the air. And he was not the only one doing this, as hundreds of Kage Bunshin were doing them with Amaterasu sitting on a blanket drinking tea. Both deities walked over to the sun goddess as they looked at Naruto. "What is he doing?" Poseidon asked as each Naruto moved in sequence with a dragon in the front. The dragon was humanoid without wings with 8 horns coming out of his head, 4 per side, and with a long flowing orange mane of hair, white scales covering its body, and red face paint across its snout and on either side of its face. They wore what looked like armored pants and a flowing cape with leather wraps around their knuckles. That is Ikarakenryu, and he is showing that batch of clones some of his fighting styles, like some of the other dragons are doing, Amaterasu said as Artemis and Poseidon has a good looked around and saw that there were hundreds of Naruto clones and approximately 20 other humanoid dragons teaching. Naruto said he wanted a taijutsu that was a child and that he could pass on to his children one day, Amaterasu said as Artemis looked shocked. "So he's going to merge all the fighting styles with the Uzumaki," she said as a smile slowly formed. And grow and be strong once more, Artemis said as Poseidon looked at his niece. He had not seen her smile like that in a long time. What is he learning so far? She asked her mother-in-law. Hell, he's learning boxing from Kenryu over there, Amaterasu said as she pointed to an orange-scaled dragon wearing boxing shorts and gloves and punching the air. Ikara Kenryu is teaching Muay Thai and how to attack pressure points from Togekugiryu, she added as she then pointed to a spiked red dragon dressed in armor with drill-like claws on the end of his fingers. Artemis looked to the left to see clones kicking. What about that batch of clones? She asked as Amaterasu looked over. They're learning the startings of Jiao Kundu from Kushinteki Ashiryu, Amaterasu said as shouting was heard as they looked over to see two humanoid dragons with a group of clones. Over there, Kaonoryu and Yakedo Konoryu were teaching Naruto how to tap into the Kyuubi, she told them as Poseidon saw the clones gained a slight red glow around them before seeing the only non-humanoid dragon in the area with clones. It was a black dragon whose upper body stood vertically while the lower body ran parallel to the ground with a plated light silver underbelly and had fins instead of legs and dark gray eyes. It was wearing a mask. Red fin pads with small white spikes, 2 on the front fins and 1 on the back fins, along with a red rope tied around its lower half with a red harness held together with a silver cross. Its mask is black with a silver lining, and it juts out past the back of its head to form a crest with the 2 black spikes jutting out of the sides of its head. 2 sharp-bladed shurikens stick out of the back of its neck and back. These shurikens have 3 blades each, and their tail ends in a sharp diamond point. Who is that? He asked as he indicated to the black dragon. Amaterasu looked over. That is Shinobi, and she is teaching then the silent killing, while over there is the original Naruto with Bahamut and Tiamat, the 2 sages of the Dragon Clan, who is teaching Naruto Haki, and then finally, that group of clones over there is being taught the Rokushiki by Fuma, Amaterasu told them as they nodded. Speaking of real Naruto, he was sitting cross-legged in front of the 2 dragons that tested him before the Platinum Dragon looked up and saw that Artemis had returned. Naruto, summon another clone so that I can take over while you train with your mother, he told Naruto, who nodded and called forth another clone before walking over to his mother and saw that new person next to her. Naruto, I would like you to meet my favorite uncle Poseidon, who I asked if he could have some suitable swimwear for you. As the god of the sea, he has access to materials that would be good for a ninja to use when he needs it, Artemis said as Naruto nodded, who then looked at Poseidon. Hello, Poseidon-sama, Naruto said to the sea god, who waved him off. Please call me Poseidon when not in a formal setting, he told Naruto, who nodded. Now I need to ask you something, Poseidon said to Naruto, who nodded. I have a son who will need help using his powers, and with how my brother is, I will be unable to help him like Artemis is helping you, he told Naruto, who nodded. So I wanted to ask the favor if you could train my son until he can use his powers, he asked Naruto, who nodded. I would be happy, Poseidon, Naruto said as he turned to his mother but stopped and turned back to the sea god. What is his name? Naruto asked the god, who chuckled. His name is Perseus Jackson, Poseidon said as they both turned to Artemis. Now then, as I said earlier, I am going to train you in the Suiman Hoko no Gyo, so if you would, Uncle Poseidon, Artemis said as she nodded to the sea god. He raised his hand as a cyclone of water formed around Naruto, and before his clothes were washed off him, and then when the cyclone died down, it showed Naruto in orange swimming trunks and bright red. Who was the woman in the war water just then? Naruto asked the god, who looked confused for a second before sighing. I'm sorry about that, my boy, as when your mother came to me for them, I had to tell the Naiads about you and what was needed, and when they found out that you're Artemis' son, they went into a frenzy making swimwear for you, and well, I used that cyclone of water to just change your cloths, but it seemed that some wanted to help you, he told his grandnephew. Naruto nodded before looking at his mother, who shook her head. Anyway, do you remember what I told you earlier? Artemis asked Naruto, who nodded. Then you do that while I go and shout at my former teammate and students for not helping you and get the scrolls that I left with Sarutobi, Artemis said before she teleported out as Naruto started to slowly walk onto the water with Amaterasu and Poseidon watching him. The stream is too thin, Amaterasu said to her grandson, who nodded before turning to Poseidon. Would you like some tea? She asked him. Yes, please, he told her. Kanahagakure, Inuzuka clan compound. Artemis appeared in the middle of the compound, and all the Ninken started to shake as they felt the anger she was sending out that her son was not helped by her former teammate and student. To say she was angry at them was an understatement. She was living as she walked as the Ninken bowed to her as she passed them, and the Inuzuka looked shocked and frightened at the woman that was heading for the house of the head of their clan. And they knew that they could do nothing about it with how the Ninken were and how they reacted to her. Mom, what's happening? She heard the voice of her former student Hana Inuzuka as she got closer. I don't know, the voice of Artemis' former teammate Sume Inuzuka said as Artemis walked closer until she saw them. That was when Artemis saw them and growled, Tsune, Hana, how nice it is to see you. Both women turned and froze at who was in front of them. Sume has an animalistic look and has long, spiky, untamed brown hair, vertical slit-like pupils, elongated canine teeth and nails. She also has the clan fang markings on her cheeks as well as markings over her eyes and a dark shade of purple lipstick. She wore the standard outfit of a Konoha shinobi consisting of a flak jacket and a black suit underneath with the sleeves rolled up and bandages around her legs. Then there was Hana, who had long brown hair, which she wore in a ponytail with 2 locks of hair framing her face over her large, black eyes. She also wears a light shade of lipstick and has the traditional fang-like tattoos of the Inuzuka clan on both cheeks and a tattoo on her upper right arm resembling a flower. She wore a brace on her left wrist, bracelets on her right hand, and bandages and usually was dressed in the beige Konoha medic uniform. Around them were 4 Ninken who walked out and bowed down to Artemis. 3 of them the same gray fur with white undersides and short pointed ears that mostly resemble huskies. The other is an adult canine with a wolfish appearance, black fur, and a white underside that most closely resembles a northern Rocky Mountain wolf. This Ninken is missing his left ear and wears an eye patch over his right eye. Kuchi, Sume started, but when Artemis looked at her, her words were a chord in her thought. Yes, Inuzuka, Artemis said, her tone as cold as ice. Sensei, how are you here? You died, Hana said more, showing that she was braver than her mother, but froze all the same when the goddess's eyes moved to her. And before both women knew it all, the Ninken that were a part of the Inuzuka clan had joined them and stood behind Artemis, and the hounds that belonged to both Hana and Sume stood by Artemis' side. To think that I saw you as a friend, the moon goddess said as the Ninken started to growl at both Hana and Sume. The entirety of the clan was shocked. Is she using a jutsu on them or something? An Inuzuka clan member asked, but Sume's partner cut in. You fool, this is Artemis, goddess of the hunt, and all hounds obey her. He growled out as they looked shocked. May I ask why you are here, my lady? He asked Artemis, who looked down at the one-eyed hound. I have come seeking answers from my supposed friend and student and why they did nothing to help my son, she said as the other hounds started to bare their fangs at the 2 Inuzuka women. Now Kushina, let's talk about this, Sume tried to say, but a chin shot out and wrapped around her neck. Beatings, burns, broken ribs, shattered bones, electrocuted, buried under a stone, starved, hunted, Artemis said. Each word dropped the temperature as each Ninken moved forward slowly as they were ready to tear both women lib from lib. She asked Sume as she spat the word friend at her. Please, Sum tried to say, but she knew that nothing she said would appease the goddess. The Ninken moved closer as Artemis raised her chains up, lifting Sum off the ground as she choked her. I should make it so that your clan would never hunt again. Have your Ninken turn on you, Artemis said as her eyes showed the power that frightened both Kunoichi. Turn your clan into pig for me and my son to hunt until we grow bored of you, then feed you to your Ninken, she added as the cold look in her eyes became frigid. Hana said nothing as she felt like an academy student once more. And it also felt like the Shinigami was creeping into her, and Sum was no better. She asked as she looked Sum in the eye. Konoha, Sum tried, but she felt a hound bite at her. Can always add a new clan of new hunters that my son is going to bring, Artemis said as Sum. I can teach. Sum tried again but was cut off again. You should have done that when he joined the academy as you promised me, Artemis said as her chain tightened around Sum's neck as tears started to flow from her eyes. Nothing then. I best be rid of, Artemis was saying before Hana fell to her knees. I'll marry your son and become nothing more than his property and will just be used for breeding, she cried as Artemis looked over to her. Sum looked at her daughter in shock. Is she thinking straight? She asked herself. Artemis narrowed her eyes at her, the woman. What would my son and I gain out of this? It seems your mother would make it so that you would never follow that pledge, Artemis said as Sum's eyes widened as she looked at Artemis. I am a goddess. Did you really think that I could not read your mind? Artemis asked Sum, who shocked before the moon goddess turned to Hana. Swear on the river Styx that you will do as you said, and if you fail to marry my son or do as you have said, then your soul shall be drowned in the Styx for all eternity, Artemis said as Sum looked shocked as she looked at her daughter. Hana, I'll do it as I can take the pain of child, Sum tried to say, but the chain around her neck tightened once more to shut the woman up. Hana looked at her mother before looking at her former sensei and saw only hate directed at her, and she knew that she deserved it. I, Hana Inuzuka, swear on the river Styx that I shall marry Naruto Uzumaki if he wishes, and, if not, to just be used for breeding and birthing new Uzumaki clan members, Hana said to Artemis before all of Konoha felt the earth beneath their feet shake slightly. Styx has accepted your oath. If you break it, well, I will wish you luck, Artemis said as she dropped Sum on the ground as looked down at the woman. You failed your mother and father, and they would have killed you for what you have done, Artemis said as she turned and started to walk away. But stopped when Sum started to speak. I, Sum Inuzuka, swear on the river Styx that I shall aid Naruto Uzumaki if he wishes, and, if not, to just be used for breeding and birthing new Uzumaki clan members, she said as Artemis turned to Sum, who just faced the ground as the ground shook once more. I will make it up you and work to help where I should have, Sum said as she raised her head up to look Artemis in the eyes. We shall see, Artemis said as she turned to the black-furred Ninken. I'm putting you in charge, and if she fails, you will be the one to kill her, Artemis said as the Ninken nodded as she walked off. The Ninken looked at Sum and Hana before they all walked off and to their partners as Hana and Sum left there alone with their Ninken. They stayed quiet for a while before Hana looked at her mother. What's going to happen now? She asked. Me, Kushina, Mebuki and Makoto promised each other that we would look out for each other's kid if anything happened to us, and I know that Makoto was the only one that had followed thou, Sum said as she looked at her hand. Not recognizing them, I saw him as the Kyuubi, told Kiba to make fun of him and aided in the hunting of him, she muttered as her Ninken scoffed at her. Here is what you two are going to do, and that is finding a way to fix the mess that you have made, or I will follow Milade's orders, he said as he walked away with Hana's Ninken following him. Hana thought back to everything that she had done to Naruto, and she realized that she was no better than her mother, and so Hana stood up as her Ninken stopped and turned to her, but she said nothing to them as she walked into her home, leaving her mother alone outside. Sum, still looking at her hands, thought back to her genin days, her teammates, and Hana getting taught by Kushina. No, Artemis, her brain corrected before tears started to fall from her eyes again. What have I done? She asked quietly as the tears dripped. She was a student of Tsunade, a quarter Uzumaki and a teammate to one, so she should have known seals. But the fear got to her. Not anymore, Sum thought as she picked herself off the ground. I'll fix this, she said before she walked into her home after her daughter. Artemis walked through the building, making her way over to the main office of the building. She slowly approached a door that led her to someone who had failed her like her old teammates had. She opened the door, and she spotted the man. Hiruzen Sarutobi. Hiruzen had tan skin with short spiked gray hair and a small goatee. His face was gaunt with wrinkles and liver spots, with a single line running vertically under the outer corners of each eye, which stretched down into his face as he aged until they reached his cheeks, and he was dressed in a red, full-length kimono that is tied using a white sash. Hiruzen looked up in shock at seeing Artemis. How? He started to say, but she cut him off. Where are the scrolls and I left you? Artemis asked him as he looked at her confused. The scrolls that we wanted Naruto to have so that he could know who he was and be ready to fight for Konoha, she explained with narrowed eyes as Hiruzen looked at her. He said nothing to her before slightly moving his hand as Anbu jumped out to try and restrain her. The keyword would try. As the Anbu got close to her, chains shot out of her and slammed the Anbu into the walls around the office. Hiruzen looked shocked. It really is you, he muttered as he looked at her. The scrolls, Artemis said as if she was not holding back Anbu. Hand them over to me so that I can teach my son who he is. You lying pig, she told Hiruzen as the Hokage looked at her. How are you alive? He asked her, not moving from the desk. I saw you after you were run through by the claw of the Kyuubi, he said as Artemis growled at him. She told him as Hiruzen looked at her. He was not ready, he told her before he was wrapped up in chains, squeezing his life out. So, like the rest of this village, you decide to spit on Minato's memory, she said as Hiruzen narrowed his eyes on her. What about you staying away from your son then? He told her as her eyes drilled into him. My mortal body got turned into the moonlight as well as gods can't raise their children, Artemis said as Hiruzen's eyes when he heard her. That's right, I'm a goddess, she told him as the elderly Hokage looked frightened by her. Now then, I wonder if I should tell my brother about my son. And he can kill you and stop all medicine from working in Konoha except on a select few? Artemis asked, and Hiruzen saw the truth in her eyes. Have we really done anything to deserve punishment? He asked her as her eyes started to glow angrily. Beatings, burns, stabbings, broken bones, poisoning, electrocuted, drowned, hunted like an animal and starved. Artemis listed as Hiruzen knew Naruto's medical history. So do you think that Konoha deserves punishment from an angry goddess for the torment that her son has had to be under? Artemis growled out as Hiruzen looked down. I could do nothing to stop them, he told her, but she scoffed at him. You, the Hokage, your world in Konoha is law, and those that go against that word should no longer be living, Artemis said as Hiruzen looked down. You're a failure of a man. No, calling you a man would be an insult to men. You are nothing but filth, she told him as Hiruzen looked at her and he saw the spirit of his wife looking at him with the same hate Artemis was looking at him with. His eyes then moved to the picture of his predecessors and successor, and for some reason, they looked like they were frowning at him. Left side third draw, he told Artemis, who walked over to the draw and saw the scrolls she was looking for. One was black with red stripes and the Uzumaki Clan symbol over it, while the other was white with a red flame patterning across the top and bottom. She picked up both scrolls and released her chains, and everyone that was being held by them fell to the floor. She then started to glow as Hiruzen's voice stopped her form from teleporting for a moment. Is Naruto all right? He asked her as she looked at him and she saw the face of her mortal grandfather. The dragon summoning clan has taken him, and he has gained them as a summon while I'm teaching him what was supposed to be taught to those at the academy, Artemis said as Hiruzen looked confused. What do you mean? He asked her as Artemis stopped growling. He had weighted kunai and shuriken while he only really knows the standard 3 and the leaf concentration practice for chakra control, which would never help him. Both the Funyu no Jutsu and Kaifu no Jutsu and finally the Bunshin, Kawarimi and the Henge while from what Naruto has told me, Kakashi has only taught him the Kinobori no Shugyo which should have been taught to him in the academy, Artemis said as Hiruzen's eyes shot wide. That is all they teach there? He asked her as his eyes slowly started to show deep anger. That explains so much, he growled as he began to stand up. What do you mean? Artemis asked him as Hiruzen turned to her. The year before Naruto's, they had a boy who had hardly any chakra, but I saw failure reports that talk about this boy, the same as Naruto, Hiruzen said as Artemis narrowed her eyes. It seems that I cannot hold all the blame on you then, Artemis told him as Hiruzen started to walk out the door before he stopped but headed for the bookshelf he had and pulled something off it before handing it to Artemis. Give this to Naruto and tell him that I can only hope that I fix the problem that I let build, he told her before he walked out, and most of the Anbu followed him, leaving Artemis in the room with a female Anbu with a cat mask. They both sat in silence before Artemis turned to the Anbu. What do you want? Azuki, she asked them. The Anbu flinched before taking off her mask as she looked at Artemis. Sensei, she said before Artemis looked at her with a burning hatred. I'm only here to aid my son and show him his other half of the world before rejoining my hunt, she said before she teleported out as the Anbu then fell to her knees sobbing. Summoning Realm, Shinki Sakai. It had been 3.5 days since Artemis teleported to Konoha. Time difference. 3 hours element nations equals half a day summoning realm. After he learned how to properly summon Hoko no Gyo while after he had done that, his granduncle told him that an easy way to master it would be to fight his clones on the water. And he did as water walking became second nature to him as he was not even thinking about it as he and his clone fought. The next day Naruto was taught how to move fast enough to make an afterimage, how to hit nerves in the body as well as how to block the tenketsu and how to let his body react with his instinct, and it helped that he was a demigod when he was training with this as his body was moving better by learning this. On the third day, Naruto was taught how to use the Kanshi no Jutsu, which would fit into his Jinchuriki ability to sense negative emotions. On the fourth day is when something strange happened when Artemis returned. She appeared near the cave holding the leader of the dragon's summon before making her way down to where she could sense her son before she heard a scream that belonged to him, so she started running at full speed to find out what had happened to him. And when she found him, she saw him looking into the water at his reflection. Naruto, what the matter? Artemis asked him as Naruto turned to her, and Artemis dropped the scrolls in her hand to look into Naruto's eyes. They were purple with concentric circles that looked to be covering eyes. Rinnegan, Artemis muttered as she looked at her son. What? Naruto asked her. Those eyes belong to the Rakudo Sennin, Artemis said as she walked over to her son examining his eyes. The dragon also came out to look and join in on the shock. How did you? Artemis asked as she looked at her son. I think that I can answer that, a voice said as everyone turned to see a man who was dressed in a white, full-length kimono with a pattern of 6 black magatama around a high collar. The strange thing was that he was floating above 6 black orbs. He was a tall and pale-skinned man who had deep wrinkles and a strong jawline in his elderly age with spiky, shoulder-length, pale brown hair with a chin-length, braided lock hanging in front of his left ear. He sported a goatee that tapered down to his waist. He had a pair of horn-like protrusions extending from either side of his forehead and the Rinnegan, a red Rinnegan-like marking in the center of his forehead. It's good to see you, old friend, Asgoroth said as Artemis and Naruto fell to their knees. As Naruto was following what his mother was doing, Naruto, Artemis, meet Hagoromo Otsutsuki, or as you know him as the Rakuto Sennin, the leader of the Dragon Clan started. Rakuto Sennin-sama, Artemis said as he turned to her with a slight smile. Arise, Artemis, he told her as Artemis slowly stooped up before he turned to Naruto. Naruto Uzumaki, I am guessing you are wondering why you have the Rinnegan, the Rakuto Sennin asked Naruto, who nodded. Yes, Naruto said as he looked up at the man. I am fixing a mistake that I made all those years ago, he told Naruto, who looked confused. Let me tell you a story, Hagoromo asked the blonde, who nodded. Many years ago, before this time, I had 2 children, Indra, my eldest, and Asura, my youngest, the Rakuto Sennin told Naruto, who nodded but was confused by the information that he was given. When it was time to pass on to the next plane, I asked my children to do a task and sent each one to different towns, and the one that done the best job would be named my successor, Hagoromo said as Artemis narrowed her eyes. While Asura gained allies like I once did, Indra slaughtered his town. So I named Asura my heir, the Rakuto Sennin told them as they absorbed this information. Indra and Asura fought from that day onward. They fought. But the fighting did not stop with them. Their children got involved, as Indra had a son and a daughter while Asura has 2 sons, he explained to them as Artemis' eyes shot wide. Our clan's story, she said as Naruto looked over to her along with the dragon, Hagoromo and a recently turned up Amaterasu. What story, Mom? Naruto asked her. The story goes that the sage has 2 children, he who is hate and he who is compassion. During the years, both had children. He who is hate had 2 children, the son of hate and the daughter of passion, while he who is compassion had 2 sons, the son of compassion and the son of affection. Artemis said as Hagoromo nodded. It was said that the son of affection and daughter of passion fell in love with one another and wanted no part of their father's fighting, but he who is hate banished his daughter to a distant island so that she can spend the rest of her day there alone. But he who is compassion allowed his son to go there, and then both passion and affection used their chakra to form the whirlpools around that island to form the land of whirlpools, Artemis said as the Rakuto Sennin nodded. The one your clan calls he who is hate was my son Indra, and the one they called he who is compassion was Asura, Hagoromo said as Artemis nodded. And while I watched my grandchildren fight, I should have awakened something that their child should have had, he told everyone that was there. The Rinnegan, Naruto said as the Rakuto Sennin nodded once more. So why didn't you? Naruto asked him. The 2 other clans that come from Indra and Asura had caught my attention over the years. But now, with you, I see that it was wrong for me to do that. So I have awakened it for you, Hagoromo said as Naruto nodded. And I have made it slightly better than the original Rinnegan, Hagoromo told Naruto, who looked confused. The first is that, while they will always have the concentric circles, you can turn them from purple to your normal eye color. Yours can also evolve like the Sharingan, Hagoromo said as Naruto nodded. You will have every possible ability the Rinnegan and Sharingan could give, and it can use the power of the eyes that came after it, Hagoromo said before he floated over to Naruto and infected for him to stand. You will also have all of their abilities as well in a given when you are ready, the Rakuto Sennin told him as he held out both his hand. Connect your chakra with mine, and I can awaken these abilities, he said to Naruto, who nodded as he raised his hands, and for a moment he felt his hands get the form for a moment before he lowered his hands. Hagoromo nodded as he started to fade away. You will be able to pass on the Rinnegan to your children, and the Uzumaki shall be the ones that can balance the worlds, he said before he faded. No one said anything as Naruto started to slowly turn to his mother. You're going to train me even harder, aren't you? Naruto asked her as she nodded. Artemis picked up the scrolls she dropped before walking over to her son. Here are the things that your father and I left for you, she told him as Artemis handed him the scrolls. Naruto looked at the scrolls before setting them down and unrolling them with the Uzumaki clan symbols. He first saw that there was a note from his mother, then he moved past then and found that there were storage seals over it. As he looked up at his mother, all of those things were from either me or from our clan, Artemis told him as Naruto nodded as started at the first seal before releasing what was within it. A plume of smoke formed, and once the wind blew it away, it showed a katana with a black blade and a bandage-wrapped hilt. That sword belonged to your grandfather, Artemis said as she looked at the sword. He got it from his father, she informed Naruto, who nodded as he picked up the sword. What's her name? Naruto asked as he looked at the katana. Artemis looked confused. I don't know why, but I know that this sword is female, Naruto said as he looked over the sword. From what Otu-san told me, her name is Yoto, she told him as Naruto nodded before placing Yoto next to him and then unsealing a scroll. Naruto then opened it. Kongo Fusa, he read. That was one of my own trump cards where your father had his Hiraishin no Jutsu, Artemis said as Naruto nodded before moving to the next. It was another scroll, but with his newly awakened sensory skills, he saw something different. That is our family tree, and it hold every Uzumaki like and will grow with each one born, Artemis explained as Naruto put the before he moved on to the next storage seal and unsealed the next scroll. Shisho Fuin. Naruto glanced at the scroll before unsealing the next scroll. Hake no Fuin Shiki, Naruto said as he looked over the scroll. The next thing that was unsealed was bags that looked filled to the brim with money. All of those bags hold the entirety of the Uzumaki clan fortune, Artemis said as Naruto's eyes shot wide open. Before he could dwell on the cash right in front of him, he moved on to the next and final item, a mask. A mask that covered his mouth, to be exact, and it looked like it came from an oni. What's this? Naruto asked his mother. That was my mortal mother's mask, but I do not have a clue what it does, Artemis said as Naruto nodded. Mom, like me, was better known by another name, and while I was the Akashi, she was the Shihohei, Artemis said as a smile formed on her face. Now then, you're training, Artemis said with a smile, but for some reason Naruto saw the face of the Shinigami behind her laughing. 4 days later. Naruto stood ready to return to his team as his mother, grandmother, bears, wolves, and dragons stood around him. You ready, Naruto? Artemis asked her son, who nodded. Over a few days, a day and 12 hours, Naruto had grown a little bit, and he had hand-changed his clothes. He had an orange camp shirt that was under a black kosode with black hakama that had his shuriken holster on his right and an orange hakama himo. Black sandals covered his feet, and the blue fabric of his hitai was now orange, and the yodo was on his back. He had also grown his hair out somehow, as his hair had grown to become waist-long with shoulder-length bangs framing the sides of his face, covering most of his right eye, and for some reason that is unknown to all is that it is natural for his hair when grown out to turn from blonde slowly into crimson. Yeah, I'll be Chūnin soon, Naruto said with a smile as he pulled the mask that used to belong to his mortal grandmother onto his face, hiding his mouth. Then I'll visit that camp you told me about, Naruto said as Artemis nodded. Kuno, you watch over him. All right, Amaterasu said to the fox at Naruto's feet, who nodded at the sun goddess. The fox named Kuno looked like a mixture of fennec and Arctic fox with golden fur and an old Uzumaki hitai wired around her neck. Shosen walked up to Naruto as he looked the Jagras in the eyes. I'm going to send you back to where you were. Are you ready? He asked the blonde, who nodded before he was covered in smoke. Kanahagakure, Training Ground 44 Forest of Death. Naruto and Kuno were recalled to the Forest of Death. As they looked around, and Kuno saw something on the ground. Naruto, it seems that Sharpshot was right, Kuno said to Naruto. And then Naruto felt a point of his brain point to some point far away. That but be Sakura, Naruto thought as Kuno jumped onto Naruto's shoulder as they jumped up to a branch. He moved fast through the trees as he would sometimes vanish from his original point and reappear 10 branches ahead. Are you sure that you should be using Shunpo? Kuno asked Naruto as said blonde was getting closer to the point his brain was telling him. Yes, and something is telling me that something bad has happened to my team, Naruto told Kuno, who nodded as she got ready to fight. As they moved through the first, a loud bang rang as Naruto picked up his pace before landing in a tree. Naruto narrowed his eyes as he looked down at the people on the forest floor. First, there were his teammates Sakura, who was awake, and Sasuke, who was knocked out. Then there was the person he had met before, a boy a year older than him with a black bowl haircut dressed in a green full-body suit with orange leg warmers. And then there was the team that Naruto knew belonged to the Oto Genin. So what do we do? Kuno asked Naruto through her thoughts as Naruto started to form a javelin of water in his hands. Kuno hunched on Naruto's shoulder as she saw that he was going for the attack. The Oto nin that had bandages over them started to run at the Konoha Genin, and that was when Sakura threw a kunai at him, and the gray in the bodysuit shoved his hand into the ground. The Oto nin jumped over the kunai as the boy pulled out a tree root off the ground, and that was Naruto's signal as he threw the javelin at the Oto nin. The javelin hit the Oto Genin in the back, and then he faceplanted the tree root. What the Oto Kunoichi said as she and her teammate looked around. Naruto jumped off the tree with his right leg forward as they looked around and called out, Ryu Entori. The Oto Genin looked up just in time to see their leader take a kick to the face before he got blasted into the earth beneath him. Sakura looked at Naruto, and she never thought she would want to hear his voice. Hello there, Naruto said as he landed. The Oto nin looked both shocked and annoyed that Naruto was there. So you're not dead, the other male, Oto nin, said as he looked at Naruto, who looked over at him. Naruto ignored him as he looked down at Sakura. You alright, Sakura-chan? Naruto asked her as she nodded. And Sakura then saw that Naruto's eyes had changed as he had one look that was purple, while the other was purple with a silver tint to it that was covered in concentric circles. Naruto leveled a glare with his Rinnegan at the Oto nin with his hands making a claw-like hand. Don't act tough. The nun that looked like a mummy came at Naruto from behind with his arm forward that had the weird gauntlet. Naruto moved the gauntlet out of the way with one of his hands while he pushed one finger into the ninja with a fast strike, and it went into his shoulder bone. Shinra Tensai. Naruto called out as the Oto nin was sent flying backwards by some unseen force as he rolled over the ground. Naruto then burst forward as the other two Oto Genin were surprised when their teammates saw Naruto coming at them before he jumped into the air and shifted his form. His hands turned into paws as his body became lean, and his hair grew out and around his neck into a mane. His body took on a feline-like body, and he turned into a lion. He landed on the male ninja that was not sent flying and bit into his arm as he used it to defend against the lion. Zaku, the Kunoichi cried as she tried to get closer, but the now named Zaku raised his other arm to Naruto's head and called out, Zenkaha. A blast of wind shot out of his palm, but before it could hit Naruto, his teammate was in his place. Zaku called out to her, but Naruto, still in his lion form, jumped onto his back before breaking his arm with his weight. Kin got up to see Naruto pinning down Zaku, and then a sickening crunch rang out as she saw that Zaku's arm broke before running over to Sakura and holding a kuni to her throat. Back off, or I'll slit her throat, Kin called out to Naruto but found herself on Zaku's back with Naruto behind Sakura. Zaku said as he pushed Kin off him. As he got up to his feet with his broken arm bleeding before, he saw something on Kin's head. What the? He is saying before the something turned out to be Kuno, who let out a torrent of blue flame at him before jumping off Kin's head and landing in front of Sakura, who was stunned and amazed by what had happened. Kin turned to see Noro gathering chakra in his mouth that was glowing red before a beam shot out. She barely got out of the way, and it still hit her arm and burnt it as she clutched it. All three Oto genin saw Naruto walking around Sakura with his fangs dripping in Zaku's blood. As the bandaged Oto genin walked with a limp arm and glared at Naruto. "Dosu, what do we do?" Kin asked him as Dosu looked at her. "We leave," Dosu growled out as all three of them got ready to jump. "Leave your scroll, or I think my teammate will go after you," Sakura said as Naruto locked eyes with all three of them. And they saw that she was right, so Zaku threw the scroll over to her with Kuno catching it in her mouth, and the three Oto genin jumped off as Naruto shifted back to his human form. He then turned to Sakura with a smile as he smiled at Sakura and pulled down his Oni mask. "So what happened when I was gone?" Naruto asked her as Sakura looked at him gobsmacked. "What did? How did? Who is? What?" Sakura stammered as she looked around. "What did I do? How did I do what I did? And who is this sitting in front of you?" Naruto asked her as Sakura nodded. "Well, what I did was defend and save a beautiful girl that was molded by Aphrodite herself. I used my dojutsu and some of its abilities to beat them around before using an ability that I have thanks to my mother to turn into a lion. And she is Kuno." Naruto listed for Sakura as Kuno walked over to Naruto and gave him the scroll. Sakura looked confused by what he was saying. "Who is Aphrodite? And you have a dojutsu?" Sakura asked as she got up to her feet. "Is it like the Sharingan?" she asked him as they both walked over to have a sit down. "Oh, you sweet Theros child. No, the Rinnegan is the eyes of the Rakuto Sennin," Naruto said before the boy in the bodysuit walked over. "And Aphrodite is the goddess of love, beauty, lust, desire and pleasure," Naruto said to Sakura, who started to blush at him, saying that the goddess of beauty made her. "Your turn," Naruto said as Sakura nodded. "After Orochimaru threw you into the forest, and they attacked us and bit Sasuke," Sakura told Naruto, who looked confused. "Sasuke then gained a tattoo like the one you have on your stomach that holds back the Kyuubi," Sakura said as Naruto looked at her. The boy in the green bodysuit looked shocked at what Sakura had just said. "He has what?" he asked. "Where is the seal?" Naruto asked Sakura as she pointed at Sasuke's neck. Naruto approached his downed teammate and carefully looked at Sasuke's neck before spotting something. It was three tomos circling each other. "What the?" Naruto muttered as he saw Sasuke sweating. "Lee, can you help me for a moment?" Naruto asked the boy in the bodysuit, who nodded. "What do you need, Naruto-san?" Lee asked him as he walked over. "Carefully lift Sasuke up and support him. I need him sitting," Naruto said as Lee nodded, and both of them got Sasuke sitting. Before Naruto could have a better look at the marking on his neck, flame-like patterns started to come out of the mark. But before it could, Naruto quickly placed a hand on Sasuke's shoulder and pressed a finger in like one would a piano. The flame-like patterns stopped crawling over the Uchiha. "Naruto-san?" Lee asked Naruto as he saw Naruto narrow his eyes at the marking. "If that is what I think it is, then we need to get to the tower as soon as possible and inform the Hokage Gigi," Naruto said as Lee looked confused while Sakura looked frightened. "What do you think it is?" she asked him as Lee nodded. "I believe it is called a curse seal that is a vile yet beautiful thing," Naruto said as he pressed Sasuke's shoulder with another finger. "It draws on the mind of those that have the seal placed on them. And while it's like a drug, only someone that wants to use it for power can draw out its full power," Naruto told the two of them. "Can you remove it?" Lee asked Naruto. Naruto leapt forward to examine the seal closer before Naruto shook his head. "No, and even if I was able to do just that, I don't think that it would come off," Naruto said as Lee looked at him. "What do you mean?" Sakura asked him. Naruto looked over to her with a frown. A curse seal is a parasite that, once placed, you need to find a way to seal it. But the only work if the person that has the curse seal does not want power. Naruto said as Sakura nodded. But the person who places the seal normally leaves a portion of their soul or chakra inside the seal. Naruto told her as Sakura's eyes shot wide open. Can't you remove it or stop the seal like Orochimaru did with you? She asked Naruto, who shook his head, shocking her. Why? She asked as Naruto let out a sad sigh. The seal that holds back the Kyuubi is called a Hake no Fuin Shiki. And it was made to link my chakra with the Kyuubi, but Orochimaru used something called Gogyo Fuin, and that was made for people like me so that it makes sure the Jinchuriki is kept in check. Naruto said as Lee nodded along with Sakura. A curse seal does not hold back a Biju, but it does work on the chakra, but unlike Biju chakra it sends the vile chakra into the normal chakra and tricking the body in thinking that it's normal chakra. Naruto told them. What do you mean? Sakura asked. Our bodies can only handle chakra that we humans make. Naruto said as Sakura nodded. But for a Jinchuriki, we have to hold back a Biju. So we are given seals that slowly trickle the Biju chakra into use. Well, that is the case for me so that we can use it, but the seal that we have stopped use from chakra poisoning. Naruto told Sakura who got it. But the curse seal does not do that. Sakura said slowly as what Naruto was telling her got to her brain. With Sasuke wanting to kill someone and he said he needs power. So the curse seal will feed that, she said as Naruto nodded sadly before he looked to the sky. It's going to be dark soon. Naruto said as he turned to Lee. You head back to your team. I got things here, Naruto told him as Lee nodded before he jumped off. Naruto laid Sasuke back down and pulled out kunai, which had a yellow tag that dangled on end, before placing them around Sasuke. Naruto then formed the snake seal as golden chains burst out of each kunai and formed a net above Sasuke. That should stop him if he goes berserker. Naruto said as he walked over to a tree root and sat down as Sakura saw that the purple of his eyes turned blue and blue-silver, but they kept the concentric circles. Naruto pulled out a brown scroll before setting it on the ground and unrolling it, and Sakura saw seals over it before Naruto unsealed meat and some vegetables. He then crossed his fingers and summoned 3 clones, who walked off to gather firewood. Naruto formed the tiger seal before calling out, Mokuden, Kisaisaku, and the roots around Naruto grew out of the ground and started to weave together and form a table. He then unsealed a knife that looked to be made out of silver and started to cut up the meat. Sakura walked over to him and saw him move his knife quickly and perfectly cut the meat. I didn't know you could cook, Sakura said as she watched him. My summons taught me how, Naruto told her as Kuno nodded. You gained a summons, Sakura asked him as Naruto moved onto the vegetables while nodding at her. When? She asked him. After Orochimaru placed the Gogyo Fuin on me, you tried to save me, and what Kuno tells me is I used Karyudo no Maku on you. I fell to the forest floor, was almost killed by a tiger if not for a pack of wolves. 3 bears and Kuno, and then one of my summonses which was looking for someone to be a summoner found me, brought me to their home where time flows different, removed the Gogyo Fuin and worked with my mother and grandmother to train me, Naruto said with one breath as Sakura looked shocked before her eyes narrowed slightly. You met your mother and grandmother? Sakura asked him as Naruto nodded. Then why aren't you living with them? She asked as Naruto gained a sad smile. All I can say is that there are rules that my mother and grandmother have to follow, and they hate them, Naruto said as one clone came back with water while the other started to make a fire pit. He then moved the camping pot over to the fire pit before he took the water from the clone and poured it to the pot. He then knelt down and snapped his fingers, and a small trail of fire jumped out of his fingers and into the firewood, that stared to turned into a campfire. Naruto returned to cooking while Sakura watched him, and she would have never known that seeing Naruto cook looked so cool. The way he handled a knife, how he cut the meat, and the way he prepared everything. Not to mention the kuno. But before she could talk more, Lee returned with his team as Naruto looked out of the corner of his eye at them. The first was the kunoichi of the team, who wore a pink sleeveless kipao-style blouse with red sleeve trimmings, yellow fastening buttons, dark green pants with a pouch adjusted to her thigh, and her forehead protector and sandals were both blue. She had dark brown hair and eyes with her hair up and put into two buns, making it look like she had panda ears. Then there was Lee's male teammate, who had fair skin and dark brown hair tied back into a loose ponytail tied a few inches above the end and featureless pale lavender eyes. He wore a beige-colored shirt, a soft blue shirt beneath that, and mesh armor beneath that with dark brown shorts, blue shinobi sandals, and wrapped bandages around his right arm, chest, and right leg, and he wore a black forehead protector under which was a smaller headband with two straps that framed the sides of his face. "How can I help you, Lee?" Naruto asked him as his teammate narrowed his eyes on Naruto. "Naruto, is it all right if my team spends the night here?" Lee asked him as he walked over to Naruto with a smile. Naruto gained a small smile. "Sure, Lee, do you want something to eat?" Naruto asked him. "Why are you only talking to Lee?" his female teammate asked Naruto with narrowed eyes as Naruto looked over at her. "Maybe because I don't know your name," Naruto said as he set out 4 plates and summoned a clone who walked over to a stone. "Oh," she muttered as she looked sheepish as the clone walked back with the stone and gave it to Naruto. Lee's male teammate looked at Naruto before holding his hand out. "Hand over your scroll. It has been fated that we would meet. And if we fight, I will," he was saying before he felt a great weight on him as he looked up and saw Naruto's eyes drilling into him. Lee looked back and forth between the two of them before seeing that his teammate started to froth at the mouth, with tears beginning to fall from his eyes. "Neji," the other kunoichi said as she looked at the boy on the floor who had taken out a kunai and was lifting it to his own thought before he came back to life and looked at Naruto, frightened. What was that?" Neji asked Naruto as he looked up at the blonde. "Me putting you in your place," Naruto told him as he returned to the table and continued cooking. Neji saw red and rushed Naruto with his kunai ready. But Naruto spun around as things shot out of his sleeve and wrapped around Neji. The thing that had burst out of his sleeve was 2 dragons that resembled giant snakes with long, serpent-like bodies that had a bright, brilliant coloration and pattern that served as an indication and warning to its extreme levels of toxicity. Much like many other animals, it has numerous large fangs and teeth capable of injecting, transmitting, and spraying venom. In contrast, it did not have a forked tongue. It had a series of sharp spines of various shapes and sizes on the top of its head. "Now you can behave, or I can have my dragons take a bite out of you, and that will kill, thanks to their venom," Naruto said as the snake-like dragons coiled around Neji. "Your chose," he added as the dragon bore their fangs at Neji. Neji said nothing but dropped the kunai. "Good choice," Naruto said as the dragon released Neji and turned to Naruto. "All right here," Naruto said as he unsealed some fish that the dragons ate before they returned to the summoning realm. Lee moved his team over to sit them down. "So what are we having?" the kunoichi asked as Sakura looked at her. And she soon realized that she still had not identified herself. "I'm Tenten," the now named Tenten told them. "Traveler's stew," Naruto told her as she nodded as Naruto returned to cooking. "Naruto, what do you summon?" Sakura asked as Naruto looked over to her. "I mean, they looked like snakes, but," Sakura said before trying to find the right word. "Stronger?" Tenten asked as Sakura shook her head. "Meaner," she gave as Sakura nodded. "Dragons," Naruto told her as Sakura looked shocked. "The type of dragons I used to restrain Neji are called Siltherwing, and I use them in a jutsu called Bakuryu Noroi," Naruto told them as they nodded. And Neji looked annoyed. and if Neji had not stood down they would have bit him, and with them being one of the most venomous dragons. Naruto said as Neji looked shocked now along with annoyed, and if you looked in his eyes frightened. A hush was soon over the small camp as Naruto cooked, so Sakura turned to Tenten, and the two started talking while Lee walked over to help Naruto while Neji brooded. After 10 minutes, the food was cooked. Naruto and Lee plated the food up with Naruto eating from the pot as Sakura looked at Naruto. As Sasuke going to starve? She asked him before she saw him point to Sasuke and saw one of the golden chain going into his stomach. I'm sending chakra to the chains at the same time I'm having to convert chakra into nutrients, Naruto said as a golden chain shot out of Naruto and linked with the other chains. And while I turn my chakra into I'm also turning nutrients into chakra, Naruto said as the four others looked shocked. They were amazed by what he was doing. Neji could not believe it as, to him anyway, Naruto was a failure and would never do anything meaningful. But here he was, doing something extremely risky but beneficial. How are you doing that, Naruto-san? Lee asked Naruto as Naruto gained a cheeky smile. It's a jutsu I made called Shokugi, and it's like the Akamiki calorie control, Naruto said as Lee looked amazed, and to put it plainly, it turns the food I eat into chakra while taking all the nutrients and sending them to my muscles, bones, eyes and brain as well as hair, Naruto said as Sakura looked at his hair. Is that why it's so long? Sakura asked him as Naruto nodded. Yay, and I am doing the same for Sasuke, but only with the nutrients, he told her as they nodded and continued eating. And while they ate, no one saw that Naruto had put some food into the fire and sent out a prayer. Once they finished, Lee got up and collected the plates before taking them to be washed as Tenten turned to Naruto. Do you know how to use that? She asked Naruto as she pointed to the sword on Naruto's back. You mean Yoto? Naruto asked as Tenten nodded. Yea, the dragons aided me in making a kenjutsu style that I could pass on to my kids one day, Naruto said as Tenten nodded before she looked thoughtful. How about this in the morning? You and me in a kenjutsu rule, and the winner takes the other's scroll, she asked Naruto, who nodded. Deal, Naruto said as they waited for Lee to come back. As he pulled out a yellow scroll before unsealing items that looked like a tent and sleeping bags, the other three looked at him strangely. Mom was going to Konoha, so I gave her money to buy something that I would need, and she came back with this and some other things, Naruto said as they all nodded. How are we going to sleep with the Uchiha out here and us in a tent? Neji asked as Naruto looked at him. I'm going to use my Mokuton Kisaisaku to build the trees together and move the roots around the tent so that it's hidden under the roots, and for Sasuke, Naruto said as he pointed at the tent. Put the tent over him when we put it up, he said as Neji nodded as moved over to Sasuke and started to put the tent up with Sakura and Tenten helping him. After a few minutes and Lee returned and helped them. The tent was up as Naruto formed the tiger seal, and the trees started to bend to Naruto's will as they began to change shape with the roots, branches and trunks moving in a way that hid the tent from view unless you knew where to look. I'll take the first watch, Naruto said as he looked into the forest. Everyone else nodded. Then Neji, Sakura, Tenten and then Lee, Naruto said as they all nodded before they all went into the tent for the night. The next day. After everyone had woken up and Naruto made everyone breakfast, he and Tenten, who had brought out a katana, stood not that far from each other, with Naruto holding the Yodo in his hand. Naruto and Tenten looked at each other as the others looked on, with Sasuke still out like a light before a wind blew in and pushed a leaf off on the tree, and as it fell in the middle of them, they jumped at each other. The moment their swords clashed, their eyes focused on one another before the Yodo started to get covered in chakra. Tenten saw that her katana was getting cut, so she used a second sword and started to fight Naruto back with two swords as Naruto tracked both swords fight them both off. Kimono Kenryu Takahiko, Naruto called out as he slashed at the air, sending out a wave of air that pushed Tenten back. Naruto then seemingly teleported in front of Tenten and cut through one of her katana. Kimono Kanryu, is that your kenjutsu style? Tenten asked him as Naruto gave a slight smile, as Tenten pushed him back. As Naruto stopped himself from falling over. I don't have a kenjutsu style myself, but I get by, she said as she zoomed in on Naruto, who pushed her sword to the side. And then what happens if you hit a block? Naruto said as he blocked another strike from Tenten. What will you do then? He asked her as she narrowed her eyes on him. Then I know I don't have what it takes to be a weapons mistress, Tenten said as Naruto nodded but set out a sigh. What? She asked him. Do you know what a sword is to a kenjutsu user? Naruto asked her as she looked confused. A sword to a kenjutsu user is an extension of ourselves. And when I make a style or use a style, it forms a bond between us and our swords, Naruto said as the Yodo gained a black aura around it that spread up to Naruto as his eyes glowed red. Tenten watched this as she looked at her katana as she saw the aura vanish, but the Yodo started to glow a golden orange, and behind him, Tenten swore that she saw a wolf getting ready to attack. Kimono Kanryu Roge Geppa, Naruto said as he slashed at the air and released a crescent wave of chakra as it cut out Tenten's katana and the rest of the forest behind her. But Tenten did not see a crescent wave of chakra flying at her. No, she saw a golden wolf with glistening fangs ready to bite her. But all it did was bite thou her katana and then the forest behind her. Kimono Kanryu is the kenjutsu of the wild, and I call on their ferocity to aid me in the fight, Naruto said as Tenten fell to her knees. Always have a backup, Naruto said as he looked at Neji, who threw him his team's scroll. Kuno caught the scroll in her mouth like she did the scroll that belonged to the Oto Inn, and once Naruto saw that it was the one his team needed, he pointed out into the rest where his Kimono Kanryu Roge Geppa went. I think I killed a team over there, and if I'm right they had both scrolls, Naruto said as Neji turned to look where Naruto was pointing before the veins around his eyes popped out as he looked at the spot before he looked back at Naruto with a nod. After a while, and when Tenten had stood up, Neji and his team left, with Tenten looking back at Naruto. Will you help me find a kenjutsu style that I could use? She asked him as Naruto nodded. She then jumped off with her team, leaving Naruto and Sakura with the unconscious Sasuke. Time to wake him up, Naruto muttered as Sakura looked anxious at the downed Uchiha. Naruto activated the Rinnegan as Sakura saw that the blue turned to purple, even if one of them had a silver hint to it, and then the golden chains net turned into separate chains before joining to Naruto and pulled the kunai out with them as they retracted. Naruto held his hand out as a puff of smoke formed in his hands as it showed a small robin. It was the size of an average robin but had what looked like pierced wings. It flew out of his hand and landed on Sasuke as Naruto got the Yodo ready as he had the robin peck Sasuke, who started to stir, but Naruto kept his eyes on the seal. Sasuke opened his eyes as he looked at both his teammates and the fox next to Naruto. Naruto, Sasuke asked the blonde, who narrowed his eyes at the Uchiha. How are you feeling? Naruto asked him as he gripped his sword. You, Sasuke said as he started to sit up. Fell. Almost died. Look different. Naruto asked as Sasuke nodded. I'll tell you later. But first, let's get out of here, Naruto said as Sakura nodded, but Sasuke looked down. I lost out a scroll, he told the blonde with a growl. How am I meant to be Chūnin if I lose that easy? Sasuke said as Sakura looked at him. Don't you mean how we are meant to become Chūnin? She asked him as Sasuke scoffed. Please, you are weak and only hold both me and the dope back, and I'm the only one strong enough to become Chūnin, Sasuke told her. Sakura looked hurt by what he said, but Naruto walked over and put a hand on her shoulder. Sakura looked over to him, and she saw caring eyes looking at her. Don't listen to him, Naruto said as he looked over to Sasuke, who was getting up. he only cares for himself, Naruto said as Sakura looked down and nodded. They then turned to Sasuke, who was looking into the forest. Sasuke, Sakura called out to him as he turned to her. We already have the 2 scrolls, she told him as she held them up. Sasuke's eyes widened before he scowled at her. How did you get them? He asked her. Naruto fought back the Oto team to get a Heaven Scroll, and he beat Tenten from Lee's team in a duel to get our Earth Scroll, she informed Sasuke, who was getting angry with each word but got pissed when Sakura turned to Naruto and asked, "What's the plan now?" Sasuke was about to open his mouth, but Naruto crouched to the ground and slammed his hand down. We ride, he told her as a sizable jutsu formula formed beneath them before a plume of smoke formed. When the smoke was blown away, it showed 3 bears of different sizes. The biggest was adorned with 2 large vambraces with Greek meander around the top and the bottom, a pauldron over its left shoulder with a fox head and an Uzumaki forehead protector acting as a collar. Then there was the bear with spiked claw gauntlets with an Uzumaki forehead protector tied around its left first leg. Then the final bear which has a spiked collar and chains around its front legs and an Uzumaki forehead protector on its head. Meet Alpha, Beta and Delta, the 3 bears that made sure that I did not get eaten by a tiger, along with Kuno and a large pack of wolves, Naruto said as he walked over to the middle-sized bear and started to stroke their head. And these 3 are our way to the tower in the middle of the forest, Naruto said as Sakura nodded as the most miniature bear walked over to her and the biggest walked over to Sasuke. Sakura climbed onto the bear, and Sasuke got on him while Naruto got on the 3rd bear, and all 3 bears took off running through the forest. And Sakura saw the way Naruto was riding as he seemed to move with the bear he was riding as she gained a slight smile at it. As they ran through the forest, they soon started to gain a crowd running with them as it was wolves, a few foxes and more bears. Genin teams that were heading for the tower watched this herd of animals with 3 humans charging through the forest. And to say they were freaked out was putting it lightly. The herd burst through the forest with Alpha, Beta and Delta taking them to the main door. Thank you. 3, Naruto told the bears as they slid off, and they walked over to him with the rest of the animals and started to nuzzle him. A large bear walked over to the 3 bears that Naruto summoned before looking at the large bear that Naruto summoned. Are you a summoned bear? They asked with a female voice. No, there are no bear summoning clans, but we joined the dragon so that he could be of use to the young lord, Naruto's bear said as the large bear nodded. Do you wish to join us? They asked as the bear nodded along with the wolves and foxes as they turned to Naruto who raised a brow. Will you allow them, my lord? The bear that Naruto rode asked him. If they want to, Beta, Naruto said as he stroked the bear's head. Beta joined the others as they returned to Shinki Sakai with the new arrivals. Sakura walked over to him as Kuno jumped onto Naruto's shoulder. What happened? She asked him. The bears, wolves and foxes that joined us wanted to join Alpha, Beta and Delta in allowing me to summon them, Naruto said as she looked amazed. Sasuke glared at him, but for the first time, Sakura ignored him. So what does that mean you summon dragons, birds, foxes, bears and wolves? Sakura asked him as Naruto nodded slightly. Almost. Dragons, foxes, bears and wolves. The bird from earlier is thanks to my dojutsu, Naruto said as both he and Sakura walked into the building with a brooding Sasuke following behind them. And it allows me to make animals that I can control, Naruto told her as Sakura nodded. They stopped before finding a giant statue of the ram seal with a small stone tablet in front of it. Naruto just looked at it with his right eye twitching. Why do I struggle with kanji when my grandmother is the goddess of where this comes from? Naruto thought as to his eyes. Every kanji character was dancing with each other. It looks like we opened the scrolls here, Sakura said as Naruto pulled them out, handed one to Sakura, and they both unrolled them before Naruto's eyes widened. Chuck it, Naruto said as he threw the school. And Sakura did the same before a puff of smoke formed before it cleared and it showed a Konoha Chūnin with a scar across his nose. Iruka-sensei? Naruto asked him as Iruka smiled at the three. Hey, you three, Iruka told them as he stood before them. It's been a while, he told them as he pulled out a pocket watch. What are you doing inside a summoning scroll? Sakura asked him as he gained a smile as Naruto narrowed his eyes on him. The scroll was used so that a Konoha Chūnin and or your sensei could meet you at the end of the second exam, Iruka said as he looked at his pocket watch. And with how your sensei is, I was asked to do me your messenger from Hokage-sama, Iruka said before he gained a smile. Messenger for what? Naruto said as Iruka closed his pocket watch with an audible click. Congratulations. You three passed, and you have a few days to rest up, Iruka said as everyone smiled. Well, Naruto and Sakura did. Naruto and Sakura jumped at each other, hugging and jumping around before they realized who they were hugging and jumped away from each other bright red in the face. Iruka-sensei, what does that poem mean? Sakura said, and Naruto looked back at it. And what the Hades does it says? Naruto said as everyone turned to him. I have both ADHD and dyslexia, and to me, it looks like they are dancing with each other, Naruto said with narrowed eyes as Iruka and Sakura winched. Well, the first part says, if heavenly qualities are your desire, acquire wisdom, take your mind higher, Sakura read as Naruto nodded. It means if you are weak in mind, find knowledge, Iruka said as Naruto nodded. So kind of like me then, Naruto said as Iruka nodded at him. The second part is, if earthly qualities are what you lack, train your body, prepare to attack, Sakura said as she worked it out. This part means me, she said as Naruto looked at her. If you lack strength, go out and train, work your body and your skills and push your limits and break them, Iruka said as Sakura and Naruto nodded while Sasuke said nothing. And the final part is, when, or open together, the perilous path will become righteous forever, Sakura finished. So that means you have to balance the heaven and the earth out to find their true balance, Naruto said as Iruka nodded. That's right. As a Chūnin, you will need both of these to succeed in your missions in the future, Iruka told them as Naruto and Sakura nodded, and Sasuke grunted. Now that me congratulating you three is done with, I have a few things to ask, Iruka said as Naruto and Sakura nodded. Naruto, what happened to your eyes and hair? Why the hell is it so long? Why do you have different cloths? And who is that? He asked the blonde before pointing at Kuno as Sakura then looked at Naruto. I just noticed that you have new clothes, Sakura muttered as Naruto gave a cheeky smile. Well, for my eyes, I awaken a Kekkei Genkei and, at the same time Kekkei Mora that goes by the name of Rinnegan, Naruto said as Iruka's eyes shot wide open as he looked at Naruto. And it can do a lot, and I am still figuring it out, Naruto said as the man nodded. My air is like this because me and my new summon, or rather the clan that I summon, helped me reverse engine the Uzumaki calorie control and make it so that any food that I eat will be rendered down into chakra and nutrients for my body via the brain, bones, eyes, skin, organs, and other things, Naruto explained as Iruka nodded. And the rest, he pointed to the streaks in his hair and the blonde turning crimson. The strikes are something that you would not believe, and it is also the reason why one of my eyes is slightly silver but the other crimson. Well, I found out that is natural for me, Naruto told him as the other three looked at him. And the first thing is not that you and Sakura are thinking about, but it is cage-level secret, Naruto told them as Iruka looked shocked while Sakura looked interested while Sasuke showed nothing. The clothes are a gift from my summons as they want something that fits with a summoner of the Dragon Clan and me being the son of someone very important, Naruto said as Sakura narrowed her eyes at Naruto. And finally, this is Kuno who is my ninja companion and ninja animal, Naruto said as Iruka looked down at Kuno and started to look her over. Did they know any ninjutsu? Iruka asked as he gently picked up Kuno and looked her over. She knows at the moment. 3 ninjutsu and 2 taijutsu, Naruto said as Iruka nodded as he put Kuno back down. Now what I know about ninja animals is that she is just fine. And you are in luck as Hana Inuzuka is here to look at all the ninja animals, Iruka told him as Naruto nodded, but his eyes turned cold at the name he said. Iruka checked his watch and, seeing the time, he pointed to a door. If you go thou there, you will find a set of stairs that lead you to where your rooms are located, and Naruto Hana is on that floor, so have her check out Kuno, Iruka told him as Naruto nodded before all 3 members of Team 7 walked over to the door.